Support for Lab Out Loud is provided by NSTA, the National Science Teaching Association. Find out more about what NSTA has to offer at nsta.org. This episode of Lab Out Loud is sponsored by the University of Nebraska at Kearney. At the University of Nebraska at Kearney, educators can enhance their teaching effectiveness with a fully online degree. UNK offers quality, flexibility, and affordability. Visit ecampus.unk.edu for more information. You're listening to Lab Out Loud, Science for the Classroom and beyond. And today our guest takes a look at inventions and how those inventions shape society.
The main premise of my book is to show that we create a technology and then this technology also shapes us. Material science is just the lens to show that. The most important thing I wanted people to feel is that they are connected to inventions so that they can ask questions when new technologies and innovations come their way and see if this innovation is pointing them in the direction that they think the world should go.
That's up next on Lab Out Loud, but first I'm your co-host Dale Basler.
And I'm Brian Bartel.
And our guest today is Ainissa Ramirez. She is a material scientist, a science communicator, and author of a new book, The Alchemy of Us. We talked to Ainissa at the end of April. We were in the middle of a pandemic.
We still are.
And that's right. But in light of the events that transpired in Minneapolis, spread across the country, and even the world, we didn't feel right about going into an interview, a happy-go-lucky interview about different inventions throughout time, without addressing some of the issues that are happening to us today. In particular, there are stories in The Alchemy of Us, Anissa's book, that speak to social injustice, that speak to bias, and we thought we need to have her back and talk about these stories also. And we are grateful that Ainissa was once again able to take time to talk to us.
So welcome back, Ainissa. This is the first time that we have ever had a guest back on the intro.
Well, thank you. I'm honored. It's just a delight to hang out with you guys.
One of the other pieces that I think is important to remember is that when we did the interview, I had just purchased the book and I had just gotten into reading The Alchemy of Us. And since then, obviously I've had a little bit more time on my hands to do reading. And so particularly one chapter stood out to me in particular. That's chapter 4. You have it titled Capture. And it's, I want to read the last paragraph of this. Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in context of what's happening. So the last paragraph starts out, these devices capture the biases that exist in our world and in turn speak to whom a culture values. As our technologies become more pervasive in our lives, whom they were built for and optimized for will be an important discussion. The goal is to make sure that, moving forward, technology captures what we really want captured about ourselves.
Yeah. So chapter 4 of The Alchemy of Us was one of the hardest chapters for me to write, but I felt it was the most important thing for me to write. It's the story about Polaroid and how Polaroid, which was a much beloved technology of its instant photography and how everyone wanted it on their Christmas list. But what I found while I was writing my book is that 8,000 miles away, Polaroid cameras were being used to buttress the apartheid system in South Africa, because all Black South Africans had to carry with them a passbook, and the passbook monitored and controlled where they could go. And at the heart of the passbook was a picture that was created by Polaroid's film.
Yeah.
And so that's the nugget about how technologies can sometimes go awry. And earlier in the book, I talk about how the technology of camera film was egalitarian at first because it was based on kitchen chemistry, but when it was manufactured by companies, it was actually optimized for lighter skin. And African-American mothers noticed this in the 1960s and 50s when they saw school children, classroom photo pictures, and saw that their children were in shadow as opposed to their students that were right next to them that were white. And so that chapter, the paragraph that you just spoke, was to kind of summarize how technologies, even the ones that we love, can capture the values of the culture, and that it's important that we put them underneath the microscope so that they really are capturing what we really want to be saying about ourselves as people.
As a chemistry teacher, that really spoke to me too, about thinking about even something as simple as the chemical formula can actually capture the biases and in some ways the unknown biases of the inventor, and in some ways the known biases as well, because this was not just a problem for Polaroid, this was also a problem for Kodak and other places, and they ignored some of it until they got pushback from industries like chocolatiers and furniture makers, because they needed their browns to come out a little bit better for advertising purposes.
That's correct. Well, can I just provide a analogy that seems to be working for how I can explain what's going on in this moment of awakening that we're embarking on?
Absolutely.
So think of America as an airplane, and you've got first class, and people are they're having a fantastic time. The seats are great, the food is great, and they're getting great service. And then you've got people in the back of the plane who are experiencing the fumes, the smells from the bathroom. The food's terrible, it's very crowded, and the service isn't particularly well. And this has been America, and the folks in first class don't see any problem with how things are. And people in the back have been saying, hey, there's a problem with this plane, and not getting anybody's attention. And I think what we're getting now is a moment where people are seeing that there's a big problem, that this plane is not working for everyone. And I hope that it's a moment where there can be change and that the plane overall works for everyone in a way that's positively. So that's kind of how I liken it when people ask me what's going on. I think it's that people are actually finally being seen. And it took a moment of violence for this to happen. But I hope that it creates a new normal going forward. Not the old normal, but a new normal.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking the themes of your book about invention, and in this case, the invention that is shaping us is that camera that we're carrying around in our pockets.
Mm-hmm.
That still has relics of those chemistry pieces that still affect how pictures are taken today.
Right.
Yeah. As social media, though, also allowing this information to spread around. Now there is, I think your book talks about just good and bad there, because social media kind of can also put us in our bubbles too.
Right.
And it's almost designed. And these are things I have discussions with my own teen children and say, this social media platform is by design trying to keep you there. So it's going to feed you what they're just going to keep giving you what you want to see. So sometimes that's not going to allow you to see something that you're like, oh, this is new, and make your brain have sort of a conflict here and need to process and, empathize from a new direction.
Right. Well, when you're talking specifically about the camera, I actually talked to the inventor of the camera, because the camera has been, it was created by NASA. And it's been great in some ways because it's helped activists do what they need to do. Like the Arab Spring was made possible because they were able to get information to people quickly using Facebook and through pictures and Twitter. And now with Black Lives Matter, we now have documentation of violence where people have been talking about this violence for a very, very long time, and it's been ignored. But now that we can see it live streamed, we're like, okay, there's a problem. The downside of cameras is that, as we're embarking on facial recognition, it doesn't equally capture people as well as you were alluding to, sort of like the film. So technology is not all good, all bad. It's just like humans. It's got good parts and it's got bad parts. And so what we create really reflects who we are.
And how we choose to use that technology as well. I think that's really made me pause in the last few days as well. And as Dale had mentioned, with social media, with photography, with how those images are portrayed, how they are manipulated as well, it really sets to define who we are now and hopefully thinking about who we want to become in the future.
I hope so. And I'm the thing that gets me excited is that young people are far more astute than their parents, and they see it. And that's what we need. We need a population that can see this problem. And if we can figure out how to create a network, and that was one of the lessons that was in the Alchemy of Us, with Polaroid, that it was a campaign of a network of activists working together where they made change. That's what needs to happen in order for us to turn the corner.
Excellent. Well, listeners, we are going to say goodbye to Ainissa, but then we're going to travel through time and we're going to go back a month and we're going to go to our interview with Ainissa again. And the fun thing is there's going to be some fun stories, and one of them is about time, a woman who actually sold time. So we're going to switch on over to that right after this. Science and math educators, are you looking for a way to enrich your 7th through 12th grade classroom? The University of Nebraska at Kearney's online science math education program will equip you with the expertise you need. This Master's of Science and Education degree combines traditional math and science content with curriculum and instruction in pedagogical techniques. The integrated option allows you to select an emphasis in math, biology, chemistry, or physics, while the chemistry option allows for in-depth focus in chemistry. Through the program, you will gain advanced strategies to maximize student engagement and learning in the sciences. UNK's online program gives you the opportunity to become a more effective science or math educator without leaving your job or community. Join an accredited university that offers quality, flexibility, and affordability. A university that prioritizes your classroom and career. Visit ecampus.unk.edu to request more information today. And now, back to the show.
We actually saw you last year. You presented at Lawrence University. And I took a picture of you presenting because I like to show this to my pre-service students because your presentation just had one word in a lot of your slides. Like I think there was one that I had that said truth. And I use that as a way to say, take a lot of text out of your slides when you're presenting as a teacher. You should be the presentation, not the presentation. So I like to thank you for that because you appear in my classes every year. But you've been busy since we saw you last. What have you got out to share with us?
Well, for the last 4 years, I've been writing a book called The Alchemy of Us, and it's kept me pretty busy because I've had to go to various archives all over the United States and also in Europe to uncover stories about inventions and inventors. So that's kept me pretty busy, and it just came out April 7th of 2020, and so now I'm busy in a new way, but that's what I was pretty occupied with doing when you saw me last.
Yeah, it's actually it's in my Kindle right now. So during the pandemic, it's always good to have some extra reading on hand. So what caught my eye was it was kind of advertised in the style of storytelling like that of The Disappearing Spoon. So, can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that is still one of my favorite science books at the moment.
Oh, great. Well, for me, I think that if you're trying to convey science to people, some people who may not even like science, then the way to do that is with stories. And The Disappearing Spoon just had a broad audience because it touched people who like chemistry, but those who like whodunits, people who want to be in the know about the secret history of this field. And so I kind of took a similar approach, although I focus on inventions and not specific chemicals. And I look at the hidden history of a lot of things that we take for granted and bring them out into the open.
Why the title, The Alchemy of Us? Alchemy kind of, as a chemistry teacher, a former chemistry teacher, alchemy feels like this was before chemistry. So I always think about it as like not quite there yet.
Yeah, well, alchemy is a term, as you know, it's an old term. It's the precursor for chemistry, but it's also very messy. And alchemy had the intention of turning things into gold, as you know. And if you look at the cover of The Alchemy of Us, it actually looks like the element symbol for gold, AU. Alchemy is the A, and U is from us. But I said alchemy because I was trying to hint at that this is a book about materials, about chemicals, and it's about how they evolved and how they had intentions of creating things like gold, but maybe missed in a lot of cases.
So you said you had to go into a lot of archives and do a lot of research there. Was there anything particular that you you had a preconceived notion and your research said, you're wrong.
Well, of course, you start off with a book proposal, and there are 8 chapters. I had a sense of what would be in the chapter, but I also knew that if you found something better than when you had proposed, it definitely has to be replaced. So everything has to serve the chapter. But there are some preconceived ideas of what I had for inventors and who they were and what was their motivations for making things. And when I went into the archives and looked at their old papers, I actually saw that they were very different than who I thought they were, and their intentions were very different too. And also, I wanted to know more about their story and their history, so the archives were important so I can get to know their personalities, so I can write about that and share that with others.
Where were these archives? What locations did you have to visit?
Oh, well, they're all over. The main one that a lot of people will know is the Library of Congress. A lot of people will very famous people will send their archives to them. So Samuel Morse was there. Herman Hollerith, who's the creator of the punch card, he was there. A lot of famous people, even the golden record from NASA, NASA's Voyager mission, the record that was sent out to space that had 90 minutes of music, that archive is also at the Library of Congress. But for more little-known scientists, I had to go to the cities that they lived in. So the Derby Historical Society, which is in Connecticut, they had information about William Wallace. William Wallace was important because he's the gentleman who inspired Edison to pursue electric lights. Edison came to Connecticut and visited Wallace and saw what he had done and then went home and said, well, I'm going to beat Wallace. So that's kind of the origin story of the light bulb. Usually we start with Edison, but in digging, I found that Edison actually wasn't even thinking about the light bulb until he met William Wallace. And so in his old town, they have details about him.
I didn't read about that part in the book that they just had out about Edison and was that Edison and Tesla or what was that one?
No, a lot of people focus on Edison and Tesla, but I really wanted to focus on the inventors of things. So okay. Edison is important for the light bulb.
Absolutely.
So what was Edison doing prior to light bulbs?
Well, he was still looking for his next idea. He was pretty exhausted. He was thinking about the phonograph. He was thinking about the telegraph, making a way for telegraphs to send 4 messages. And he actually went on vacation to the Wyoming territory because he was exhausted. He went with some friends, and they went to see the solar eclipse. And usually Edison doesn't really listen to people, but because he was so exhausted, his friends were saying, hey, there's a guy in Connecticut you ought to see. He made an electric light. And so Edison sends a telegraph to Wallace and makes an appointment to see him. And he visited him on September 8th, 1878. And the rest is the origin story of the light bulb.
So you're describing a little bit about your discoveries in the archives, kind of like how science works in the sense that you found something and it may have taken you down a different path than where you previously thought. Is there anything like that was like I went to Connecticut to find this, but then it sent me to Kansas City for something else? Exactly.
In fact, I thought this book would be a great entryway for people who like science and for people who don't like science, because when I was looking at data, if I saw a data point that didn't fit a trend, I would investigate that point, say, what's going on? What are you meaningful? Are you wrong? What's the problem? Similarly, if I were in the archives, I would be reading a book. So I was reading a book about timekeeping and not finding anything interesting. And then I saw one sentence, and it said, in the 19th century, there was a woman in London who sold time. And my brain was like, what? The same experience that I used to have if I saw that spurious data point, my brain lit up and said, okay, we need to investigate this. And so she became a significant part of Chapter 1. She's the first character that you meet when you read The Alchemy of Us. Her name was Ruth Belleville, and she had this extraordinary business where she sold time. I can tell you a little bit more about it.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I don't.
You piqued my curiosity. We have the time.
So we have the time, but in the late 19th century, early 20th century, no one knew what the precise time was. And if you were a newspaper or a bank, or if you were a train conductor, you needed to know the precise time. The precise time was located in the Royal Observatory, which was a couple of miles outside of London. So what Ruth Belleville will do, she lived in a city called Maidenhead, which is 30 miles outside of London. She'd make her way over to London and then over to the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, walk up to this steep hill, with her watch, which he nicknamed Arnold. She would give her watch to the attendant, and they would compare it to their scientific clocks. So then she knew the precise time. Then she'd make her way down the hill over to London, and she'd walk to these various businesses, the banks, the newspapers, the pubs, the navigators, who needed to know the precise time for their work. And so Ruth Belleville was called the Greenwich Time Lady, and she did this business for all of her life. Her family had started this business and had been in the business of selling time for 100 years.
Wow. It paints a nice picture, like thinking of her like standing with Arnold and getting the time and then sharing that with that was her business. That was her business. Yeah, that's a neat story. So then is there any other spoilers like that in the book that you're like, oh, this'll catch our readers here? What else do you have to share?
Well, let me also just mention that when I was discovering Ruth, I actually went to London to go see Arnold because Arnold is in the Science Museum in London.
Oh.
And there's a big case of all these different watches, famous watches, and Arnold is sort of to the side, and everybody walks by Arnold. But I stood in front of Arnold for about 20 minutes and was just so enamored. And when people went by, I'm like, hey, can I tell you a little bit about this watch? This used to be the time distribution service. So I knew I sounded a little crazy, but I was just so excited to see Arnold the watch.
You were like an impromptu docent?
I was an impromptu docent. And I said, well, you're looking a little crazy, Nisa, so you need to leave right now. But I say this in case someone wants to look up Arnold the watch. You'll find it on the website for the Science Museum. It's located there.
Oh, fantastic. So then when you were on the show last, you were talking about a podcast that you had been working on that explained science in 2 minutes. And so in doing that, you had to be concise. You had to think and script out a very small amount of information, or excuse me, a small amount of time, but as much information in that time as you could. What kinds of things did you learn from doing the podcast that served you well in writing?
That's a very, very good question. I developed a skill for the ability to explain things as succinctly and as clearly as possible because my podcast, Science Underground, was targeted for school children. And so I wanted to explain scientific concepts and make it feel like they could understand it. And so I would often parallel things to things that they knew. Okay. So that was one of the things that I learned in making that podcast. And also, I learned a lot about storytelling, like how to keep people's attention going, because I really needed that in writing a book. A book is many, many more pages than the 2 or 3 pages of script for a podcast. So that was also one of the things I learned while podcasting and how it influenced my book, The Alchemy of Us.
All right.
What made the book be what it is in the first place? Like, how did you pick this topic?
Oh, okay. Well, that's a very good question. For a long time, I've been trying to figure out how to make material science relevant and interesting to people. There's a lot of books about chemistry. There's a lot of books about physics. But material science is kind of overshadowed by both of those topics, and most people don't even know what it is. So for years, I have been putting together videos of different types of materials. Here's a piezoelectric material. When you squeeze it, you get electricity. And here's a thermoelectric material. When you heat it, you get electricity. I did those kinds of videos, and I thought they were useful. But what I really wanted to do was make sure that everyone understood the impact of materials. And the best way to do that was with stories. So I actually went through a metamorphosis, if you will, through the process of writing this book, because most scientists don't think in a historical context of the impact of their field. But that's what I needed to do in order to make this, The Alchemy of Us, seem viable and engaging to other people. So so the origin story is that I was looking for a way to share materials, and then I had to take a different approach than just profiling different materials, but in order to make more people feel connected to materials, to show how these materials were used in history and how it made what we know today.
It's amazing because one of my mentors I became a science teacher, was a material scientist, Karen Nordell, and she inspired like, oh yeah, this is one of those things when you think about why am I learning chemistry, this could be a reason for doing that many people don't always think about. So it helped me ground a little bit more into why students need to learn this or why they might want to learn this in for their futures. Mm-hmm. So what would your pitch be for why material science is important here?
Well, the main premise of my book is to show that we create a technology, and then this technology also shapes us. Material science is just the lens to show that. I'm sure physics could have figured out something and biology could have figured out something. The most important thing I wanted people to feel is that they are connected to inventions so that they can ask questions when new technologies and innovations come their way and see if this innovation is pointing them in the direction that they think the world should be going. So this is really a gymnasium. I'm looking at old technologies. I'm looking at simple technologies that you probably can make in your science classes, like a light bulb or a telegraph. So you may have not considered that they had made some impact to culture. But I'm showing you that they can make it, that they had tremendous impact with culture. The telegraph, simple, short dots and dashes, actually helped to change the way that we speak the American language of English. Who knew that that would happen?
Sure.
So if simple technologies can do this, my hope is that people will feel grounded enough to ask questions to the bigger technologies that are on the horizon.
Do you have a favorite material? One that you just can't stop telling strangers about?
What's the gateway material?
I have favorite characters, like Ruth Belleville is certainly one of my favorite characters. I also, the book starts off with me talking about my origin story and how I love science from a very young age and how I almost got derailed because the introductory science classes were just so incredibly hard and almost got weeded out. But I found my wonder again when I discovered material science. And I found my wonder even later in life when I took a glass blowing class. So I guess glass would be the type of material that I find very fascinating because I've got a chance to work with it on a hands-on level.
It's interesting because there was just a recent article talking about how the development of glass, and especially laboratory glass, basically it brought us to where we are today because that fueled scientific discovery and research in creating glass, but also in what it could allow for science in the future as well. So that's a story that caught me down the rabbit hole of, I'm going through my feeds and I still use a feed reader and I'm like, whoa, this is a good story. And I kind of tune out to everything else and read that one.
Well, you're certainly going to love chapter 7 of the Alchemy of Us. It's called Discover, and it's about the origin story of scientific glass.
Can I skip ahead to 7 ? And
you can, yeah, you can do that. I mean, it's chronological, but you could certainly skip ahead. But the thing about glass is it used to be so bad that you would pour a chemical in it and the glass would dissolve. So it's very hard to do an experiment when you're losing the container. So it required Otto Schott in Germany to come up with a glass that could handle things like acids. Also glass, optical glass used to be so bad that you would look through a microscope and it was like looking through 3D glasses. The reds would be over in one place and the blues would be in another place. It's very hard to look at bacteria if you can't really see it.
Yeah.
So Otto Schott again created an optical glass so that we can so that we could have good glass. As I say in the book, without good glass, science was blind.
And he had like 3 types of glass, and for a while they cornered the market. And
they definitely cornered the market. Yeah.
And it was at Corning that had to come in and
Corning came in. Yep. Yeah, Corning came in later, and they formed their own form of it's called borosilicate glass, and formed their own form of this borosilicate glass. And we know it today because if you're in the house cooking right now, you're probably using Pyrex, which is a borosilicate glass.
Well, glass sounds like it had a little bit of a makeover to really have its day. Is there a material right now where we are basically, we could so use a makeover for this thing to, get advances?
That's a good question. Although people don't think that steel is done because it's been around for a long time, people are still working on that. There are a few scientists that are still working on steel because it would be great if it could remain strong but be a little lighter. So I think there's a lot of materials that can require makeovers, but they're not being ignored. There's somebody working on it somewhere.
Oh, okay.
I always think of
cement.
Cement. Cement is. They're doing cool things with cement. Imagine, I live on the East Coast, so we have this issue with snow being on the ground and having to remove it. Well, there are people who are creating a form of cement where it doesn't allow snow to accumulate, so you don't have to shovel.
You had
we're in Wisconsin. Tell me more.
Yeah, right. I mean, hurry up with that invention, right?
Well, and there's such a huge energy sink, and gives off the production of cement is so much for CO2.
It's a good point. Yeah. Imagine if we did something like if the streets and the sidewalks were actually able to collect sun and then the sunlight and convert it to electricity.
Yeah.
So so people are thinking about these things.
I always think of Star Trek 4, where they talk about transparent aluminum, and not that we have not transparent aluminum necessarily, but there's got to be some of those pieces. There's got to be some. I'm waiting for I guess I'm waiting for a transparent aluminum in my lifetime.
That was to hold the whale, right?
That was to hold the whales. It wasn't to hold the whales. It was so they could see the whales in an aquarium-like thing. Because that was I was like, well, why do you need transparent aluminum? You just want to see the whales. I mean.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, no kidding.
Sci-fi, because that's what you want when sci-fi.
Well, I know what I'm going to be doing later tonight. I have some now. I have to kick off my other. I am reading about some dinosaurs. Well, they've had their day in the sun. They can wait a little bit. The dinosaur bones will always be there. I'm going to jump back into getting into the Alchemy of Us tonight.
Thank you so much.
One last question before we let you go. What kind of reading level do you think students can handle? Do you think it's appropriate for high school, or can it be even younger? Or I know your podcast was geared towards a younger listener, but where do you think the book falls?
It's certainly geared for high school. It can even go a little younger. I wrote it so that the concepts were understandable to someone who was in high school. There's no blue content. Everything's clean in there. I made that very clear that I didn't want to have anything like that.
Keep your G rating.
Yeah, that's right. And it's storytelling, so it's not dry fact after dry fact. You can pull, and for teachers, you can just jump into different stories. You don't need to start from the beginning to the end. It is chronological, but if there's something that serves you, like I want to explore how the telegraph shaped our consumption of news, you can go straight and learn about how the country was riveted by presidential tweets, not from the president that we have right now, but from Garfield's, because he had been shot and people wanted to know how well he was doing. So, so there's a historical touchstone to different things that are going on now.
Oh yeah. Huh. Well, thank you so much. We wish you luck in your book tour. I imagine that you may be able to get a book tour going soon. Yeah,
I am.
Maybe some virtual talks or virtual bookstores.
But, I'm doing virtual talks now, but I will. The book will be out in the public, and I will be speaking in the public in the late fall.
Okay, well, fantastic. Good luck with it, and we hope to hear our listeners using it in their classrooms.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Lab Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about some of the things discussed in this episode or previous episodes, you can find show notes at our website, laboutloud.com. If you have a guest idea or a future topic that you'd like to see on Lab Out Loud, go to our contact page and send us a message. Also, you can subscribe to Lab Out Loud on your favorite podcasting app, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you like to find podcasts. While you're there, leave us a review and rating. Your input helps others find our show. Thanks again for listening.